Kia ora, hello, I'm Philip Duncan. It is Tuesday, the 23rd of September. Today is the spring equinox. In fact, it was this morning, which means technically we're now out of winter and we're into the summer side of things. Although, I've got a disclaimer for you, the chance of seeing summer-like weather anytime soon is probably not showing up. We've still got a number of wintry changes on the way, especially for the South Island. So let's make sense of it. Here is the visible satellite imagery this morning showing the sun rising over the country and displaying a fair bit of cloud around. There are some clear spells though around the South Island in particular and some eastern parts of the North Island. I love the place names on these maps. The maps randomly generate them and they're kind of the same ones each time, but depends on your zoom level, and Wairoa shows up as the halfway mark between Auckland and Wellington. So I love that. My dad was born in Wairoa, it's his hometown, so kind of weird and random, but that's the reason why. Anyway, thunderstorms are offshore. Most of those are affecting Queensland this morning and they're moving away, and for now doesn't really pose any significant risk to us. But this does show the low that is forming in the Tasman Sea, subtropical winds coming down, and that's why we're hearing the talk about rain for northern parts of New Zealand. So let's make sense of that. Here is the high pressure zone just east of the North Island, stretching right up to Tonga, Fiji, Vanuatu, New Caledonia. Hello to our viewers there. That is the reason, though, why temperatures are warmer around the North Island at the moment, certainly not frosty, with northerly winds coming down, cloud, as you just saw, and we've got some rain, patchy rain around the top of the North Island. And that rain, which is sort of forming around that low in the Tasman, is held up by the big high. So even though the rain is not overly dramatic, it's very slow moving, and that can lift up the rainfall totals over the next couple of days. Meanwhile, at the other end of New Zealand, it is westerly driven weather that is still dominating your weather pattern, even if locally you might have an easterly or a northerly blowing through there. But the weather that is just south of you, that is dominating your weather pattern for the next week ahead, probably longer than that. So let's get into the forecast maps. This is noon Wednesday, tomorrow, showing 24 hours of rainfall from lunchtime today. So you can see that line of rain coming down with the northerly wind over the North Island and the weak area of low pressure just off to the west. Now the colour shading on the map here for 24 hours of rain is sort of around the 20 to 50 millimetre mark, which is not too problematic really for most places. But if the rain slows down any more than what we're seeing here, then that could lift up some rain warnings and cause a few isolated problems just here and there. But generally speaking, that rain is probably welcome by most people around at least in the farming and the growing sectors. Maybe not everyone else that are on school holidays, but we do have that wet weather stuck around the top of the country and a polar change here around the South Island. And look what's happening in Tassie. There is the next cold change. So as we go to Thursday, the polar change comes back into the South Island. Temperatures drop on the west coast. Rain up to 100 millimetres around south-westland and Fiordland. That could turn to snow in the mountains. Well, it will turn to snow, I should say. A bit of spillover into Southland. That's what I mean by not the greatest weather for lambing and calving at the moment, especially in Southland where it is colder and you've got the wet weather coming through. But eastern areas are mostly dry around the country. And remember, this is a 24-hour rainfall map. So the blue that you see, a lot of the blue, is only just a millimetre or so, just a couple of showers. So it looks wetter than it is. That's the reason why I don't usually use the 24-hour rainfall map in New Zealand. But when you've got some heavier rain around, as you see here in the North Island, moving eastwards slowly behind the high that's leaving, you're seeing 60 to 80 millimetres in some of those areas around Eastern Bay of Plenty and up towards East Cape. So as we go to Friday, windy weather is around. In fact, it starts on Thursday night, but it moves up the South Island. So into the North Island here on Friday morning, wind gusts in the purple or darker shading coming out of Cook Strait and along the mountains and ranges could be gusting over 90 to 100 kilometres an hour. That just gets up into the power cut material. You know, the odd branch comes down here and there. So be aware of that on Friday morning. Marlborough Sounds up towards sort of the central North Island, but it leans to the east of the hills and ranges. On noon Friday's weather map, you can see why it's windy. You've got the windy westerlies right across the country, sort of being squeezed a wee bit through the central part of New Zealand. That's why we've got the windiest weather showing up there. Now in the North Island, these winds are coming out of sort of the New South Wales, Queensland area. So it's not overly cold. In fact, eastern areas when the sun's out should be quite pleasant. But in the South Island, it's a different story under the polar airflow, which is coming from also south parts of Australia, but mostly south of Australia. And so your temperatures are down, snow flurries in the mountains, and a couple of showers also spilling over around Canterbury, although it does not look like very much for you. By noon Saturday, still got the windy weather around. It's mostly in central New Zealand, so the upper South Island, lower and eastern sides of the North Island. Showers coming through off the Tasman Sea. So if rain matters to you this weekend, keep a close eye on that Met Service rain radar, because these showers could be a little heavy. There might even be an isolated thunderstorm or two in there with large dry spells around it all. So it could be one of those days where it's a little bit unpredictable. On the eastern side, it looks driest but windiest for you, and the cold weather is slipping back southwards again. So there is some good news for you, and it slips back even further as we go into Sunday lunchtime. Still a bit cold around Fiordland and south-westland. Dry in many places, but you might notice a few showers coming in with that nor'west flow. It is a mild nor'west flow, so it's not very cold in the North Island here on Sunday, and it's warmer along many eastern areas, even the west coast getting a bit of a lift in the temperatures. Might only be a degree, but it goes up a little bit as we go through to Sunday. So dry, a bit windy still, a couple of showers over here around Auckland, Waikato area, possibly a little bit heavy. Taranaki southwards, it doesn't look like very much. But the windy weather isn't finished with us. We are seeing some breaks in the wind. That is the good news. You know, for those many of you that are going a little bit crazy with all the windy weather, we do still have gusty conditions around, but it is nothing like it was last weekend. But the areas in purple, again, show that risk right up around the mountains and the ranges, especially around Canterbury and also maybe into the southwest corner. Gusty conditions come through on Sunday afternoon, but it's not for everybody. Some parts of the Canterbury Plains may be fairly dry and pleasant. As we go to Monday, our final map, this is what I mean by September is an unsettled month. It's certainly been colder in a number of spots compared to previous years. Now that cold airflow comes back over the South Island on Monday. It might even come into parts of the North Island. Showers, a couple of those might be a little bit heavy and squally. And you got some snow flurries once more returning to the Southern Alps, and the temperatures are down in Southland and Otago in particular as this wintry airflow comes up from the Southern Ocean. So temperatures are down. Now, like I say, as we go into October, there are some signs that there just may be a little bit more of a balancing act. Doesn't mean we're done with the cold fronts, doesn't mean we're done with the polar air or those westerly gales at times. But what we do see, well, actually the irony is you don't see it because it's behind the Monday sign, but what you would see if that wasn't there is a high pressure zone right out of Australia. So that is moving towards us as we head towards the 1st of October. But as we end the month of September, it basically ends how it started, which is colder, windier, and for the South Island, it's a lot more wintry with those cold fronts coming through. And that polar line, which I'm getting sick of highlighting. I thought it would only be a couple of weeks and it would be gone. It is sticking around as we kick off next week. So the unsettled weather pattern, it remains around New Zealand. That is all from me for today. Thank you very much for joining me. We have another video update about the typhoon heading towards Hong Kong. Has weakened a little bit overnight. At the time we recorded it this morning, it was around about Category 4 equivalent strength. So still a very powerful storm, and it may well power up even further today. So latest on that one is out this afternoon. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you again tomorrow, Wednesday.